Welcome to Georgetown Literary Fest 2023. This is our first day, and welcome to this session. Literary Constellations, Regional Journals, Magazines, and Publishers. My name is Badrul, and I'll be your moderator for today. Take a seat. I mean, the ones who haven't have any seats yet, there's a lot more seats in front. All right, so I'm going to read a little bit of the blurb on this session from the website. Literary journals, magazines, and publishers in Southeast Asia play an important role in building creative practice in the region. They are crucial literary ventures in a world where readers and writers look towards the West for acknowledgement and acceptance, whether in the form of publication, literary prizes, residencies, or even bachelor's degree in creative writing. So representing a range of literary platforms from the region, the panelists, which I will introduce shortly, will share their experience and offer perspectives on how platforms can play a propulsive effect in deepening the literary landscape in a diverse and not to mention disparate region. So the panelists, on my right here is Kirsten Han. Kirsten is a Singaporean journalist, writer, and activist. She is the managing editor of Mekong Review, a quarterly Asia-focused literary magazine. Next to her is Faye Cura, who is the founder and publisher of Gantala Press, a Filipino feminist small press, currently based in Quezon City. She's a country coordinator for the Southeast Asia Feminist Action Movement, CFAM, and the author of 4 books of poetry. And last but not least is Wayne McCallum. Based in Cambodia, Wayne has lived and worked in the kingdom since 2004. And in his time there, he has organized 2 literature festivals, created a dedicated word pop-up, which probably you can explain after, and is a regular contributor to the Mekong Review. He recently has also published A River and a Valley Far Away, Mekong Solitaire, and Wild Angkor. So let's give them a warm welcome. So I'm going to start with first question to all 3 of you. You guys can decide who's going to answer first. So the question is, besides your work in publication, all 3 of you are also in one way or another are involved in activism. How do they complement each other? Activism and publications. As a medium, how does publication, and especially print format, help in your activism work? Maybe I'll just pass to Kirsten, since you're next to me.
Hi, yeah, so I think for me, at least when I was hired, I was told that I was hired to be an editor and not an activist at Mekong Review, which is the sort of thing that I think was fair enough, so by which the publisher meant that we didn't hire you to, so in Singapore, I work on issues like abolition of capital punishment. So I wasn't hired to be an anti-death penalty activist at Mekong Review. Mekong Review is not an anti-death penalty newsletter, and that is not what it should become under my editing, right? So I think that was completely fair, I am an activist, but I am also a professional. And I do know how to be a professional in the work that I do. But that said, there's no way that you can say that a publication like Mekong Review doesn't have values. So if we want to be a space for Asian literature and expression, then that inherently means that we care about freedom of expression. We care about political freedoms. We care about people being able to express themselves and to write honestly and truthfully about their experiences without fear of being censored or oppressed. So we try to create that space and that platform for writers and for whoever. So I mean, the other way I see it was that we don't just take work from writers, we just take work from people who see themselves as having something to say. So we have published book reviews from people who do not see themselves as writers, who have never reviewed a book before. So for example, there was a novel by Balikor Joswal called Now You See Us, which is about Filipino domestic workers in Singapore. And the reviewer that I got was somebody who is, at the time she wasn't, but right now she is the executive director of a migrant labor rights NGO in Singapore. So she doesn't usually write book reviews, but because of her background, I was like, it's very important to know how you feel when you read this book because of all the work that you've done. Like ideally, I would have got a Filipino domestic worker to review it, but it didn't work out. So this was like the next option. But yeah, so if we want to create this sort of space, then I feel like inherently there are values there that we are willing to stand for.
I'll go next. So we're a feminist small press based in the Philippines, and as a feminist small press, activism informs our work and directs us on where to spend our limited resources. So for example, if the budget allows for the publication of only one book, we'd much rather publish the work of a woman farmer or someone who's not really a writer, no? Rather than that of a professional writer, for example, or a renowned poet who anyway has access to other platforms, no, including mainstream publishing. So that's one. Next is the sales and the content of our books always support the communities that we work with. They're usually peasant women, women workers, indigenous women, women political prisoners. So a percentage of our sales always goes to them, to our partners, our project partners. And then of course the content of our books are is always progressive, no? So calling for genuine land reform, national sovereignty, justice for victims of human rights violations, etc. So that's really if Kirsten's not so if there's a delineation between like being an editor and activism, in our case that's the sphere that we're working in, and also the collaborative nature of our publishing process, where we like really visit communities and think of like books to create with them. I think that's a it's collaborative, and also it informs us and keeps us updated about what's happening in the Philippines and in the region and in the world also. So as a medium, you have a question about books as a medium. No? It's always great to have printed copies of our books in libraries and archives, because the threat of censorship is always looming over the Philippines. In the past years, there have been instances where the military removed so-called communist-related literature from university libraries and public libraries. No? So there's always that threat of censorship. So it's nice to have like physical copies of physical books like being carted by readers, for example, from the Philippines abroad, no, and it gives us peace of mind to know that somewhere in the world there's a copy still existing and being translated as well.
So I've got to be careful with this question, because activism in Cambodia it can be quite risky. And Bishi as an outsider, and also aware of how the implications for the Cambodians I know. I see literature and the other work I do with like the pop-ups and the festivals, providing platforms for what I call soft advocacy. That's the advocacy which doesn't scare the state, because it doesn't realize what you're trying to go around the back and switch on the lights to raise awareness and to shine. And when you start shining light, then you give the people in Cambodia the opportunity for them to make the decisions. But what I've found with literature magazines and writing for the Mekong Review is reviews can become a useful vehicle for advocacy. Now I'm going to provide an example of a review I wrote on a book called Corporate Nature by Sarah Milne. Now, Sarah wrote about state corruption, international NGO collusion, and events culminating in the assassination, the unfortunate accident that led to the death of Chuck Vutti. Now, Sarah did a very, very good job, but it was an academic book. And that book isn't going to get read by a lot of people, and it's quite expensive. So by doing a review in the Mekong Review, it got out to a lot more people. The issues, I was able to bring to the fore the issues. But also I actually worked with Sarah. So I'd actually had first-hand experience. So I was able to add my own what had occurred from my perspective and weave that. I mean, it was the longest review I've ever written. It took me 2 weeks. But I wanted to get it right because it was really important. And in the end, I think that was a very powerful thing that the review created an opportunity to do, and I think that's something that I can get that past the state, and I actually coined a term in there. I mean, it draws on Big Pharma, but I called it Big Conservation, and now I'm getting people from journals from other places now wanting to cite it, so it's starting to ripple out. So, yeah, I feel that's good. So, yeah, that's my sort of take on that.
Thank you. So, still on the topic of activism, I mean, the thing about activism is that it's a sustained effort. You do one thing today, you continue it, you sustain it, it's a whole campaign if you want to change certain things, if you want make some sort of impact either in policy or in the society and all that. So you have to talk about the same thing over and over and over again. But when it comes to publications, especially periodicals and all that, you always have to come up with something new. You always have to this issue you talk about this, the next issue you talk about that. So how do you sort of go around it? Do you really do it once and then next issue would talk about something else, or you try to revisit things that you feel that needs to be revisited, that you feel that hasn't gone the length that it should go to?
I am happy to revisit. I think the benefit that we have as well is that the Mekong Review is a quarterly publication. So even if we come back to the same topic in the next issue, it's been 3 months since you've seen the last issue. So unless you're reading them all back to back to back, I don't think people necessarily sometimes notice that we've revisited as much as we have. But I also feel very strong, and this comes from my experience as a freelance journalist. So the Mekong Review is the first literary publication I worked for. Before that, I was a political journalist. And this came from my own experience of being a freelancer, pitching publications, and being told, oh, we can't take your story because we can't take your story on freedom of expression because we ran a freedom of expression story in Indonesia like last week, and then that's too many Southeast Asia stories close together. And I'm like, but freedom of expression in Singapore is not the same as freedom of expression in Indonesia. Or they would say, we've already run a Singapore story, so we can't take yours, but they're talking about two very different things. And so I got very frustrated with, I understand why the editors do it, but I got very frustrated with this approach as if it's possible to say all that can be said about a country, about a place, about people or an issue within the one article. So definitely in the 4 issues of Mekong Review that I've produced so far, we come back to issues of LGBTQ plus discrimination and equality multiple times, but from different countries, from Vietnam, from Singapore, and we keep coming back, and I feel like there is something different every time, because even though there is that common thread that links, there are different experiences, there are different approaches, there's always something new to learn. So it doesn't bother me to come back to certain things, because I feel like every time we come back, it reinforces, but it also deepens.
I completely agree with Kirsten. I think what gives, like me as an activist and a publisher as well, what gives me stamina to continue on is joining the movement actually, and this involves engaging in a lot of activities that are outside of publishing and completely different from publishing. So it means joining mobilizations or rallies, shouting with the people, participating in educational discussions, or community immersion, going to communities to research on the actual condition of farmers. So I think that's very important to stay updated and educated about what's really happening. That's what gives an activist strength and also knowledge to continue on. About trying to find something new, it comes with I agree with Kirsten. It comes with the work. For example, I have a background in literature, in formal literature, and I didn't think much about women farmers writing poetry, for example. But because of my activism, I learned that poetry is being used by communities in their everyday life. For like women farmers, they write poetry while selling their vegetables or while guarding the farmers from the farm from encroachers, etc. So they recite poetry in rallies, they recite poetry in their community meetings and in Christmas parties. No? So it's very ordinary to them. But to us who studied poetry, we think it's this lofty thing that only a few can access. No? So there's always a lot to learn, is what I'm saying. There's always a lot to learn and a lot of new information to share, whether through publishing or through being in the actual movement. Now, so we're also part of a network of grassroots feminist organizations in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And just the knowledge that there's a network of like-minded feminists and activists who have your back, no? And share your vision of a better world, better just world, inspires us and encourages us as well. So like recently we drafted a statement in support of Palestine and calling for the end of the genocide. So, yeah.
I think my background's a little bit different because I'm a contributor, and even the books I do, I have my own imprint. When I started off in terms of what I was reviewing whatever the opportunity was. So I did everything from K-pop interviews to Korean cinema, restaurants. But that was important, and I think that's why magazines are important, because it's building my name and building my craft as a writer. And from that, I was able to move into things where I was able to advocate more, the soft advocacy. So my first book was a memoir about my first year living in the rainforest, helping set up a community-based ecotourism project with a local community of ex-Khmer Rouge and timber poachers. So, but I haven't done that previous writing. I wouldn't have been able to write that. So don't underrate those little zany things. Now, in terms of contribution, the things I focus on are nature, and that nature, people, and the relationship, and trying to put that into words. And that's taken me from a river in a valley far away to Mekong Solitaire, which is a collection of stories inspired by magazines like Orion, which merge poetry, images, and words to create a more detailed understanding of our relationship to the environment. And then, oddly, the one that's probably been most successful was now a field guide to basically the natural environment and ecotourism opportunities in the Angkor region of Cambodia. And that seems to have, I think it's just the right time, because people are looking to, re-inspire Siem Reap after COVID, and that's going very successfully. So I'm actually having people turn up at my house wanting to buy it. So I've never had that before. But there is an advocacy aspect to that, because unless people value or realise what is there, then those systems face a lot of threat from people with a lot of power. So that's my take.
So of course we cannot run away from local politics. I mean, politics in your respective country, especially when it comes to writing and activism work. So my question is, how does the political situation in your own respective country affect your work, and vice versa? Does your work also reflect on the political change and the political situation in your own country? Maybe we can start with Wayne first.
You have to repeat that one. I thought that was good.
Oh, it's for. Okay. I'll repeat. So basically, the question is, how does the political situation in your own respective country, political situation, affect your work, and vice versa? Has your work been sort of affecting the political situation in your own country also?
Yeah, we're very very cognizant of what the political environment is in terms of what we can put out there, and you get very nervous at certain times, especially around elections. Even doing open mic poetry, I've had to censor myself. So it unfortunately becomes a habit of self-censorship, and I'm always concerned about my Cambodian friends and the people who are involved with the writing I do, because the implications for them is always more serious than for me. I think living in the kingdom, it's very different from what I'm used to. And I had a very strong advocacy background back in New Zealand. I would battle against dairying and its impacts on waterways, and that was adversarial. You do not do that in the kingdom. The soft advocacy, and I think that's a great opportunity with literature and some of the other platforms, which hopefully we'll get to talk about, is they do provide a vehicle, not only for raising awareness, but for also providing the skills and the ability of the Khmer to be able to articulate themselves. And if that's a contribution I can make as a non-native, then I think that's a good thing. That's the best I can do in the situation.
Maybe I'll go next. So the question is like, how does the political situation affect our work and vice versa, or reflect also the political situation? So Gantalat Press was formed in 2015. It's just 1 year before Rodrigo Duterte, who's known to be a macho, misogynist president, and he also launched a massive counterinsurgency program, which killed a lot of activists in the Philippines during his time, and which continues to this day actually with the new president. So I think the political conditions of the Philippines at that time warranted the existence of a feminist or like an activist press, and also of activist artists and writers as well, because everyone had to like speak out and resist, in however way they could. Now, for us in the press, we used our books to try to make sense of the fascism and the state terrorism that were happening during that time. But also we felt the need to document all of these attacks, and not only the attacks, but also how the people were continuing to bravely resist these attacks. So it's not always the powerful, dominating. We also have these people continuing to resist despite the danger. So we realized the importance of really documenting what's happening, no, through books and through literature when the son of the former dictator, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., became president, and he's using historical revisionism to try to redeem his father's name and legacy. No? So we realize we need all of these books, no, so that in the future there's very little chance for historical revisionism to maybe triumph or something. So that's how the political conditions affect our work. And then, so we, among our recent publications are a collection of poetry by a woman freedom fighter, Kerima Tariman, who was martyred in an encounter with the military in 2021. So we published her collected poetry. And then the latest one is a collection of works by a woman political prisoner. She's a peasant woman organizer who was illegally arrested and detained for her activist work. No? So she's in prison now for 3 years. 3 years now and counting. So I think that these, like books like this show that if I may call it as it is, no, U.S. imperialism continues to this day in the Philippines. As you may know, the Philippines was once a colony of the United States, no, and Americans saw us as their little brown brothers and sisters. And unfortunately, it continues to this day as reflected by all of these neoliberal policies. And like now, there are bombings happening in peasant communities in northern Philippines because the U.S. Military wants to build military facilities there. No? So imperialism continues with the help or with the aid of those in power in the government, and of course the U.S. resources as well. No? So that's what these kinds of books reflects and shows. More importantly, most importantly, I think, it shows that the people's, as I mentioned earlier, the people's resistance also continues, and women activists and women writers are an important part of that struggle and resistance.
I think for me, there are many layers to that question. So I was doing already a lot of political and activist work in Singapore before I joined Mekong Review. So I was already kind of like on the radar in Singapore. And so when I joined Mekong Review, I was also kind of concerned that I didn't want that sort of political baggage to affect the magazine. Personally, I feel that the Singapore government should be happy that I work for Mekong Review, because then I don't have time to do other things. But I was also very careful that I didn't want things that happen, repercussions of my activism work to then be taken out on the magazine. So I tried to maintain some sort of separation. I don't think a complete separation is possible, but at least some sort of separation. So recently, there were a group of independent media who were trying to collect signatures for in support of Palestine, but also to condemn the Singapore government's decision to not allow any sort of public gathering related to Israel and Gaza, and to also announce that it's an offense to be wearing foreign symbols, which include symbols related to Israel and Palestine. So they had a statement talking about how that's further restricting freedom of expression in Singapore. And I was careful to sign that as myself and not as Mekong Review, because Mekong Review is not a Singaporean publication. We are officially registered in Australia, and we are a regional publication, so I also didn't want it to be opened up to saying that Mekong Review is foreign influence, which is very popular, kind of hot button, like foreign interference. So I try to be careful about that. And also for Mekong Review itself, we have to keep an eye on security concerns, because we cover Asia, and I feel like now there are more countries in Asia that are hostile to freedom of expression then there are countries that are open to it, right? So for almost every country and every contributor, they have their own risk assessment and their own risk profile. So we've had people who write under pseudonyms because they're still operating in the country and they don't want to be targeted. We have people who, have different sorts of levels of security concern that we have to kind of be aware of, right? And there was, in most issues, we run an in-house ad of our magazine where it's a full page ad of saying subscribe to Mekong Review, and we have all the little covers of past issues of Mekong Review. And if you're the sort of person who looks very carefully at all of them, you will see that they don't run in perfect sequence. There is a cover that is missing, and it is the cover of, there was one issue of Mekong Review where the cover was of a Hong Kong protester in full gas mask. That would violate national security law in Hong Kong today. And like the cover says glory to Hong Kong, right? Like so we actually remove that because we are like, we have all these subscribers in Hong Kong. We don't want to be posting this to them. And opening that risk, right? So we have to think about these things constantly because we have contributors from so many countries with so many different levels of like political vulnerability.
Thank you. I can go on and on about activism and stuff, but I think I'm going to open it up to the audience first. I still have a few more questions, but maybe later. So if anyone has any question, we can just do a first round of question first. There's a mic at the back, so if anyone wants to, just raise your hand and then the mic will go to you. Anyone? Yes, front here. Yes.
Okay. Do I have to stand up or anything? No. It's like a classroom. Okay, hi. My name is Sarah Jun Mukhtar. I'm a cartoonist and a writer from Malaysia. So my question is, this is my first literary festival that I'm going to. Normally I go to either art festivals or comic festivals. I'm branching out. So in regards to the, I understand activism very important considering the landscape nowadays, voices wanting to be heard. In regards to the title of the talk, which is like a literary constellations, so that caught my attention because as a newcomer, I see myself as a newcomer to like Southeast Asian literature. I was hoping to kind of get an idea of, I know there are 3 stars, like Mekong Review is 1 star in that constellation, and Gantala Press is another star as well. And literature festivals such as this one is another star. So are there other stars that somebody who's kind of like new to, maybe they haven't published, they're looking for places to publish their work. Are there any other stars in this constellation that you would guide newcomers, such as myself, whether it's poetry or comics, like what would you recommend? Like, oh, these are the big stars or the places that you should know of to submit your work to. Thank you.
I think we have a saying in sociology is when you do research, start where you stand. So I would say just look around and check out your local Facebook pages and things like that, because, for example, in Cambodia, there's a lot of little platforms operating. Now, I operate, we refer to it HOW, which is I call it a pop-up. So it's an alternative to a festival, because I've organised 2 festivals and I can sympathise with the organisers of this one. They are like a super tanker, and it's a lot of work, it's a lot of money and a lot of effort. But the HOW pop-up, that works like, oh, an artist is coming through, let's just organise an event. And literally we've had poets from overseas, we've had writers, we do little pop-up books like this, like I think this costs $1 to produce, things like that. So I would say a really good point is to start just around where you are. See what's growing, because there are lots of little things. Some of them don't survive very long. It's like the rainforest. I have to say that, being a nature guy. Some things pop and come up through the canopy though, and I guess you're probably looking for more of those. but I often think those seedlings at the bottom are also very interesting, and often that's where the really interesting things are happening.
I think sometimes there is this kind of idea that you have to already be at a certain level to write for a literary journal. And maybe that's true for some of the other journals, but when I started working on Mekong Review, I really kind of didn't want it to be that way. Because of course it's important to have high quality writing, but high quality writing doesn't solely come from big names or experienced writers, right? Like, and I think it's actually really, so as an editor, I feel like perspective and experience is more important than the actual quality, like the standard of your English or the standard of your writing, because I feel like as an editor, it's my job to help you work on that, and it's easier for me to polish and edit a piece where maybe the English language is not that strong because the contributor doesn't speak English as a first language, than for me to have a beautiful copy, but actually the knowledge is very surface level. So I prefer to work with people who are embedded in their communities, and then let's work on the English and the writing later, than to commission writers who are extremely experienced, but just kind of parachute in and out again, right? So I remember the first issue that I worked on, I got in touch with, I asked through a whole bunch of friends because we wanted to work on, we said, let's do a story about a neighborhood. And I said, how about the neighborhood in Taipei, which is known as Little Burma, because there's like a big Myanmar immigrant community that's moved to Taipei, and now there are these questions. Now that it's been like 2-3 generations, there are questions of, are we Burmese, are we Chinese, are we Taiwanese? And I was like, that's really interesting. And I asked through a whole bunch of friends, and I got somebody who again did not see herself as a writer. She runs an NGO that does civic engagement and capacity training for youth in Taipei, including youth in the Burmese community. And so she wrote a piece about working with the people there and how the community was trying to deal with identity and also mobilize to support the civil disobedience movement after the coup in Myanmar. So she wrote this lovely piece. It took a lot of work because, you know, she doesn't see herself as a writer in the first place, and even when she does write, she doesn't necessarily see herself as writing in English. So originally I had asked her for a 3,000 word piece, and in the end we ended up with 2,000 because 3,000 was really such a big ask for like a first time, and we worked on it for some time and had a bit of back and forth. But I think I would much rather have had that than to call up somebody who's very, very good at writing in English and then say, go to this neighborhood that you might never have visited before and just like interview some people for like a day. But, you know, she had that experience from months of relationships, and that was much more interesting. So I think I always prefer to do that. I don't mind working with people who've never written before. It's quite interesting where you find people who really want to write. Like I got to know somebody in an Apple store, as in he was working at the Apple store, and I was just trying to pick up something from the Genius Bar, and he's like, what do you do? And I said, I run Mekong Review, and he goes, you know, I've always wanted to be a writer, but I have so much anxiety that I'm in therapy for like trying to write, because like and until today I'm still trying to hopefully, like I gave him my email, I was like, please pitch us, and until today I'm still hoping that he will come back. I think he's trying very hard, and so like I think that I love that sort of thing, right? To find people who you might not have necessarily expected these things to come from. And I think I want Mekong Review to have, you know, the very well-known and well-respected writers, but to also have space for these voices, especially in Southeast Asia, where some of our best writers and best voices do not write in English. So to find ways to have it in translation, or to find ways to work with them. We had a story following up on the stadium disaster in Malang, the Kanjuruhan stadium disaster, where we got 2 Indonesian journalists to go and interview the families like months after and follow up with them. And you know, they don't usually write in English, so the draft comes in and it needs a lot of restructuring, it needs a lot of work, but I would still much rather do that, yeah.
I agree with Wayne. No, you start with where you are, because that's how actually Gantala Press started. We saw that there weren't any women's presses in the Philippines, and so like now, 8 years later, I think we're still the only feminist press in the small press in the Philippines, and it started with like identifying like feeling the lack or a certain lack, and then trying to respond to it. Finding people who are like-minded and who can join you in your work. That's one. But I think like following Wayne's Wayne mentioned about pop-ups. There's a small press scene in the Philippines as well, and we also organize like zine festivals, art festivals where zinesters, zine creators, or like artists who just photocopy their artworks and just are able to produce limited copies of their prints or stickers, merchandise, or their artworks. We're all able to come together to sell our publications and our products. No? So it's also a kind of response also to mainstream and big publishing, which is not really very accommodating of the kind of content that the small press, artists or publishers are producing, because most of these creators are also activists. They're very rebellious it's not very commercial, not very sellable, their works. So yeah, I think any like you're a star in yourself in this universe. No, so if there's like if there's such a thing as regional literature trying to find its position vis-a-vis Western literature, there's also like the concept of small presses trying to also find their own position against mainstream publishing. And working as a small press, it actually gives you a lot more flexibility because you're able to respond to issues immediately. You can, for example, something happens and you want to respond or you want to say something about it, you can just produce a zine in 20 minutes, have it photocopied and then distribute it. If you compare that to like mainstream publishers, that takes years to publish your book, and it has to undergo this long process, this editorial process, etc. So there's a lot of flexibility also in being small, in being a small star. But I think the important thing is to find like-minded comrades and allies.
Thank you. Any more questions from the floor? Oh, there. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. My friend wanted to ask, how do you balance mainstream media, how certain events are just continuously important, let's say female rights or something, it's constantly important. However, people can get desensitized to it when you keep talking about it. So, for example, on Twitter, right? People are talking about save Gaza from genocide and stuff, but then there's also a lot of side of people saying, oh, we're getting tired of doing advocacy for this because it's just constant desensitization. How do you balance keeping something important and keeping other people from getting desensitized to it?
Yeah, I think it's in the sort of zone where I work in, I look at doing things which are innovative, which also excite me. Because the reality is what I do is a passion project. I have to work to get oxygen to live. all the literature is what is in my heart. So I had this idea a few years ago. I really like the Great Lake, the Tonle Sap. It's the largest lake in Southeast Asia. It's got a place called Prek Tol, which is like the Serengeti of large gregarious freshwater birds. Most amazing place. And I've been very lucky to actually, spend a night there. And when dawn comes, all the birds, 100,000 birds are taking off. It's like being in an air traffic control tower where there's absolute chaos. Now, there's a point to this. I wanted to raise awareness of just how important and how threatened the lake is, but I wanted to do it in Cambodia. So how do you do that safely? And also like poetry. So what I've organised, I've actually got funding from the US Embassy, is we're calling it the Great Lake Poet Express. I've got a very good poet coming across from the United States, Carlos Andreas Gomez. I've got Kasol Kev, who was at this festival in 2017, an outstanding Khmer poet, and myself, and a local group that works with teenagers on poetry, creative writing. We do a couple of workshops over 2 days. And what we're going to do, we're going to connect those poets with these workshops, and the kids are going to create poems about their life, their experience, and the culture of the Great Lake. And we're going to mix that with audio and visual. And so we're calling it the Great Lake Express. We're going to do the first ever, probably in history, an open mic performance in the floating village. And then we're going to take that to Siem Reap, we'll take it to Phnom Penh, and in the future I hope to be able to publish a book and to get it out there. So I think making it fun, but also looking at different ways to shine the light. Because people do, if you keep going about climate change, it's like doom reading, doom scrolling. I can't handle it myself. So I think look for innovation, and most of all, let's have some fun when we do this if we can.
Yeah, I think the one kind of advantage that Mekong Review has is because we are a quarterly literary journal, we get to take things a bit slower. It's a magazine that you can read cover to cover if you want, or you can read one article and then come back weeks later, months later. So I like that it has that sort of slower, more meditative quality, so I don't worry as much that people get desensitized from what's in our magazine. Unlike, I understand what you mean because of all the journalism that I did, where it's really like that 24-hour news cycle is really relentless. If it's half a day old, it's no longer breaking, we need a new one, and it's really overwhelming. So I think I do like that Mekong Review gives that sort of space. And what I also enjoy is that as a literary journal, the editorial instincts that we have are quite different from what I was used to in news, and it allows for more kind of personal introspection and meditation of history and how history affects our lives and affects our families. I've been talking to people about pitching about how the food history of their country has affected their families' relationships. And so I feel like these are the sorts of stories that also highlight important issues, but from an angle that is very accessible, because you can relate to how you can relate to these common themes of love and comfort and familiarity, and think about the issue that way. Whereas if it was in the news, we would be like, what is the angle of reflecting on the history of the mantou to your family? There is no news there, but actually there is something quite profound in taking the time to think about how food might have affected your relationships, how food might affect your view of who you are and where you come from. And I think I really appreciate that Mekong Review creates that space to have that sort of reflection.
I think it depends on, a lot of it depends on being clear about your position on the issue, for example, and what you want to happen. So, for example, regarding the Palestine-Israel issue, 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 the Palestine-Isra we get distracted by media and all of this information that's coming in through social media, etc. But if you're clear about what is actually happening and why this shouldn't happen and what we should be doing as a community, then that will give us strength to, and we won't be distracted by, being desensitized or whatever, because we're clear with what we want to do. And I think that clarity can be attained by education, constant education, and awareness of of the issues, like looking at the issue historically, reflecting, as Kirsten shared, looking at it historically and not just at specific, instances or events. For example, looking at the October 7th attack as as an isolated event, as if it wasn't connected to this decades-long struggle of the Palestinian people, for example. And then I think another way also of keeping sane or staying sane is talking about the issue with other people, no? Like maintaining a community where you can, you can bounce ideas off of one another and see if your perspective is correct or it's limited or whatever, or we always have many things to learn from other people. So community is really very important, especially in times and situations like this. And I think it also relates to the previous question about finding spaces, in this constellation. It's really finding your community, and if in the Philippines, for using the Philippines as a context, I would always encourage comics artists or artists, writers to contribute their talent to the movement, because it's narrating, for example, the struggles of farmers through comics is very powerful. Like, comics is a popular form and art form in the Philippines, no? And it has a long history as well, because of imperialism also. But we can take advantage of that and share with the general public about these important stories that otherwise would not have been written or talked about, using our art, our comics, slam poetry, for example, or also professionally trained writers can share their expertise in writing when drafting statements of support and political, in editorial articles, etc., or letters to the editor, things like that. So I think that's what I would advise. Really finding a community, whether online or it's better if offline, no.
I think I have less than 10 minutes, but I have questions for each of you, so I'm going to try to squeeze in all three. So the first question is to Faye. So Gantala Press, you have essays, you have zines, you have cookbooks, you have poetry, you have comics, and at the same time, it's non-profit and it's volunteer run. So how does that work?
So the sales of our previous books is what supports the printing of our next ones. So I think the fact that we're able to produce a lot of books just shows how warmly our books are received. It shows that there's a demand and an audience for the kinds of books that we produce. So we're very thankful for that. We're also helped financially by small grants and unsolicited donations from people who want to help, because there will always be people who want to help and who will believe in your cause. So that's also very helpful. Of course, friends who connect us to fellow publishers, no, and artists, fellow writers, future collaborators in various projects. Friends are very important. Friends and comrades. And then, but in essence, we remain a small press operating from a small apartment. No, we don't have our own office or a bookshop, although that is the dream. The only full-time staff, which is me, does not receive any salaries. So it also involves a lot of passion, commitment, dedication, and hard work.
Thanks. For Kirsten, so you took over editorial of Mekong Review, which was something that was already running for quite some time. So how was that, the transition from being it almost identified with an individual, Min, and then you taking it over? How did that happen?
I think so. By the time that I was hired, Min had already sold the magazine. So my experience of taking over Mekong Review was, it was late October, and being told that we need to get the February issue out on time, so you start tomorrow. And then I started tomorrow, and then I have not stopped since then, so it's been a year. So it was very hit the ground running. I was commissioning articles for the February issue on the first day of work. There was no like, this is your orientation period. There was no orientation period. It was like, nah, this thing is yours. Okay, now start. And so there were questions like, what is the pitching process? And it's like, okay, the pitching process is whatever you decide the pitching process will be from now on. So then working through, pitching, invoicing processes, what is the production timeline? Like the production timeline I had to set as well. And so it was it was very interesting. It was a very steep learning curve because my background is in like political journalism and online. So like this is the first print publication as well. So some really basic things I just had to learn on the job. Like I remember the funniest one was I was on the call with my boss and he was like, there are too many pages, so you need to cut. And I was like, why must you cut pages? You know, every piece is precious. And he was like, the pages need to be in multiples of 4. So you cannot have a 38-page magazine. And I was just like, why? And then like 2 days later, I was like, because otherwise it doesn't fold. And I was just like, so really basic things like that, right? So like, I had to learn that very quickly, had to learn how to like, when the designer comes back and say it doesn't fit on the page, which is not as bad as it's too short for the page. So like cutting is better than trying to find something to put inside. And so like I learned all that on the job, but I think that has been quite fun to do. And I think, you know, it's an interesting role because ideally I would just think about editorial all day long, but then you also now have to think about like sustainability and business, right? So like, definitely my experience at Mekong Review is being a for-profit company is not the same thing as having profit, which I think a lot of people can relate to. So like now how do you grow subscriptions? How do you grow so that your business is actually sustainable in the long run? Yeah.
My last question to Wayne. So you're not originally from Cambodia. And not only you write about the kingdom, but you also write it in English, in a foreign language, which is in a country that is not necessarily that familiar with that language, unlike Malaysia or Singapore or the Philippines, for example, just to compare. But at the same time, your work has been very well received. So can you share how did that all come about?
You know, I remember you shared this question and I thought, actually, I don't think I am very good at that. I think the biggest thing I try to do is avoid cliches. As you know, I don't want to be Graham Greene or Jonathan Swain, and I mean that's been done, and I think that's the biggest challenge. How I try to build the bridges is through the other platforms. So with the festivals I've helped to organise, I've made sure we've had good Khmer representation. I've found money to get Khmer to be able to come to our festivals. Through the poetry events, I've reached out and we've had some, young Khmer come and do open mic poetry. the very first time standing in front of an audience. And I think those have been, that's where I've had more success. But I think just as something I wanted to say, and it came up with the answers here, and maybe this is a good way to close, is that I think what you find in the magazines and on the zines and everything is I mean, modern publishing is leading to a monoculture. The capitalist imperative leads to, we're going to get Lee Charles, something else, Lee Charles. What you see in this, the diversity, the bibliodiversity, and it's like an ecosystem. A biodiverse ecosystem is more sustainable, more resilient. Your culture is more resilient. And I think with what's happening here and what we do, we provide that resilience. And I think that's really important. And that's a real value of what we do, however we do it.
All right, thank you. That's a really nice way to end this. Unfortunately, we running out of time. So a round of applause for all the panelists. I'm sure anyone who has more questions, I mean, they'll be around, so you guys can, talk to them personally. But thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And hopefully you guys are still here for the next 3 days and with more interesting sessions to come. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to you all. Thanks.